I was standing in front of the house where I spent most of my childhood, clutching a bulky box covered with silver paper, slightly wrinkled at the corners from my nervous hugging. Aurora greeted me with the freshness of March, which mixed the spring wind, the smell of melting snow, and the first blooming buds. Fluffy clouds floated over the roofs of the houses, and the sun, as if teasing, then hid, then reappeared, throwing long streaks of light on the asphalt. My heart was beating as if I hadn't just come to wish my mother a happy birthday, but was going to a fight that I feared and longed for at the same time. I tried to straighten my back, as I was taught in ballet lessons, and slowly climbed the familiar wooden steps of the porch. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching it. This $2,000 coffee machine, brilliant, multi-program, with a built-in milk frothing system, was not just a gift. She was my last argument, an attempt to build a bridge that we hadn't been able to build in a decade. In my mind, everything turned out differently. When my mother saw the gift, she would melt, remember how she brewed coffee every morning, humming her favorite old jazz, and maybe even hug me. I knew she still drinks coffee every morning, even posting photos of cups with ornate captions, "New morning, new opportunities." And I decided, if not love, then at least memory will be able to connect us. When the door swung open, I met Lucas' gaze. He looked exactly the same as always, neatly cut, with a perpetually tan face, as if time had not touched him. Annoyance flashed in his eyes for a moment, as if I'd interrupted something I didn't have access to, but he quickly put on that same cold, mechanical smile he used every time we met. "Emma," he said with forced warmth, "you've arrived. Come in." I nodded and stepped inside, holding the box in both hands. The weight seemed double from the tension in his shoulders. The house didn't smell the way it should. The scent of cinnamon and dusty book pages disappeared, and the feeling of comfort and inviolability disappeared. Instead, there was the glossy smell of expensive air freshener and something sharp and alien, as if I had crossed the threshold of a hotel rather than a house. As I walked down the hallway, I looked around. There are no traces of our past on the walls. The family photos of me as a child holding my father's hand are gone. Instead, there are canvases with a smiling Lucas, Mom, and two girls, Caitlin and Olivia. Their well-groomed faces filled every corner, every opening, as if even the walls now belonged to them more than to me. I felt a painful lump tighten in my chest. The living room was filled with laughter, conversations, and the clink of glasses. I recognized some of my mom's friends. Their voices were as ringing and shallow as before. They sat in groups, with their hair perfectly coiffed, perfumed to the point of headache. Olivia and Caitlin were standing by the window, discussing something on their phones, and when they saw me, they looked at each other, not hiding their grins. "Emma." I heard my mother's voice, clear and perfectly modulated, "You've arrived." I turned around. She was walking across the room towards me, lightly, as if she were floating. She was wearing a deep emerald-colored dress that accentuated her slender figure. Her hair is styled in perfect curls, her makeup is restrained but flawless. She was shining, and the light seemed to cast a shadow over me. "Happy birthday, Mom," I managed, trying to smile. "I thought you might like this." I held out the box, and she picked it up with interest, turning it over as if trying to guess the contents by weight. "It's so big," she said. "I hope it's not a dishwasher," she added with a laugh. I pretended to laugh. She began to remove the wrapper with the look of a child who was allowed to unpack a gift before breakfast. But as soon as her fingers reached the lid and she saw what was inside, her face changed. The smile disappeared. The eyebrows drew together slightly. "Coffee maker?" Her voice sounded like a gunshot. "My God, that's practical." She placed the box on the nearest table without even taking out the appliance. The room went quiet, and someone giggled. Caitlin leaned over to Olivia and whispered something in her ear. They giggled in unison. This is one of the best models, I said hastily. She can make any coffee, latte, espresso, whatever. I remember how much you love. Thank you, Emma, she interrupted, this time coldly, but let's have some cake instead. And everything. No thanks, no how nice, just an icy look and complete indifference. She had already turned away from me, heading towards the table where her guests were gathered. I remained standing with my hands still clutching the air by inertia, as if I still had the gift. My throat was tight, my fingers were numb. I spent the whole evening on the edge, like a stranger invited by mistake. Mom chatted with the guests, laughed at Lucas's stories, hugged Olivia by the shoulders, and complimented Caitlin. I was sitting in an armchair by the fireplace, picking at a piece of chocolate cake with a plastic fork, which suddenly seemed tasteless. I asked myself the same question over and over again. Why did I think it would be different this time? That a coffee machine, even the most expensive, can destroy a wall that has been built over the years out of silence, indifference, and disappointment. I looked at my mother. She was laughing, showing someone a photo on her phone. Her eyes were shining. But not for me. Never for me. When I turned 19, my life disintegrated like thin glass cracked by a single inaudible blow. It all started with a phone call, the restrained voice of the doctor, the words that seemed to go through cotton wool, and the silence in the receiver that lasted forever. Cancer. The late stage. Metastases. These terms stabbed into my mind like blades, but I was still hoping at the time. I believed that Dad, with his kind voice and unfailing confidence, was capable of defeating everything, even his own body, which betrayed him. The 6 months between the diagnosis and the funeral flew by like a blur. We lived as if according to a script written by someone else: hospitals, tests, round-the-clock care, fractures of hope and rebirth. I spent as much time with him as possible, reading aloud to him, making tea, putting my hand on his arm when he fell asleep to the soft melodies that were playing from an old record player. His gaze was losing its former strength, but there was still so much warmth in it. He never complained. Even in recent days, he was smiling and joking, as if he wanted us not to remember him as ill. And then he was gone. The house was empty instantly, and not because of the absence of footsteps or voices, but because of the disappearance of the very essence, the breath that kept everything in balance. Mom seemed to experience everything differently. She did not cry in front of me, did not call him at night, did not keep things, as if her grief demanded silence and complete oblivion. She began to remove everything that reminded her of him with surprising haste, as if the presence of even her father's shadow prevented her from breathing. I remember walking into the kitchen and seeing that his favorite mug, the one he used to drink coffee from every morning, was gone. Then his sweater, which was always hanging on the back of a chair, disappeared. And then the photos. I looked for them on the shelves, in albums, on the walls. And I didn't find it. It's like he never existed. A month later, she met Lucas. One evening, when I returned home from class, she said, I was at a charity event. We started talking. He's a widower. I didn't even have time to realize that there was interest, almost gaiety, in her voice. A couple of weeks later, he came to dinner with us, and there was something slippery, too confident in his smile. He seemed like a stranger to me from the first minute. Dad was soft, deep, and his presence was enveloping. Lucas, on the other hand, is as sharp as ice, with that mannered tone and eyes that never held any warmth for me. 6 months later, they got married. Without making too much noise. No discussion. It's just that I woke up one morning and found out that he's now officially my stepfather. He and his daughters, Caitlin and Olivia, moved into our house. My house. The rooms have been rebuilt. The guest room became Caitlin's room. His father's room is now Lukasov's. And my children's room was divided in half. Half was left to me, half was occupied by Olivia. I remember finding her things on my bed, a makeup bag, a sequin blanket, and posters of a pop band on the wall. It was as if I was being pushed out of a life where I was once the only daughter. Mom changed before my eyes. She came alive, as her friends said. I'd say she shut herself off. She enjoyed cooking Caitlin's favorite dishes, discussing fashion, beauty, and shopping with Olivia. They went to shopping malls, watched movies together, and laughed until they cried. In those moments, I felt like a shadow stuck in someone else's mirror. I tried to be there, to interfere, to remind myself. One evening, when the three of them were watching a romantic comedy, I came over and sat on the edge of the couch. Mom gave me a quick glance and said, "Emma, it's a girls' night. Why don't you read something in your room?" "And I'm not a girl," I blurted out. She sighed with a tight smile. "It's simple. Give us some time. They've been through a lot. It's difficult for them. They need to get used to it." "Don't I need to?" My voice faltered, and I felt resentment rising in my throat. "I lost my dad, Mom." "My dad." She said nothing, then pursed her lips and turned her attention back to the screen. That was the first time I realized that my grief wasn't hers. That my loss is not her loss. After that, I shut down. There were fewer conversations. Presence in the house is becoming less frequent. I left early and came back late. My grandfather, my father's father, became the salvation. He lived in Centennial, in a small house with a wooden porch, smelling of old paper and apples. Everything there breathed Dad. There was his room, his books, his old guitar, which he stopped learning to play when I was just born. Grandfather did not ask unnecessary questions. He just poured tea, put down a plate of oatmeal cookies, and listened in silence. Sometimes he would say, "Your dad would be proud of you, Em." And that was enough to live for another week. I started spending more and more time with him. And then she stayed for good. I explained to my mom that it would be easier this way. I was closer to college, my grandfather had a spare room, and I could study more. She didn't mind. She just said, "Whatever you want," and didn't bring it up again. Many months later, with little hope, I returned to my home to pick up a few of my belongings. Mom met me in the hallway. She had a cardboard box in her hands. She handed it over silently. "What is it?" "Your father's stuff," she said calmly. "Lucas thinks it's time to free up space." I took the box without looking her in the eye. On top of it was an old green, striped tie, the one Dad wore to my graduation. Underneath it is a note with my handwriting, a Father's Day wish that I wrote when I was 11 years old. I felt my stomach tighten. At that moment, standing on the mat in someone else's house, I realized that I was no longer part of this family. And maybe I never will again. The 4 years I spent with my grandfather in a house on the outskirts of Centennial were a bit of a return to myself for me. Everything in this house was quiet and peaceful, an antique clock that measured the slow passage of days, shelves with leather-bound books on which dust accumulated, and bright windows overlooking the garden, where daffodils bloomed in spring, and in autumn the wind tore yellow leaves from apple trees. Every morning we brewed coffee in his old coffee grinder, a wooden one with a worn brass handle. This ritual was simple and repeated daily, but it was it that gave my life stability, as if it was in the silence of the kitchen, in the sound of grains being ground, in the aromas of a fresh drink that I found what I could not get from my mother: care, acceptance, presence. When he died, I felt like I was left in a draft. He was gone, but the house remained, with his belongings, letters, savings, with photos of his father and an album on the top shelf, with that very coffee grinder on the windowsill. Everything that he kept and cherished went to me. I was left alone, but I didn't feel lost. I got a job at a digital marketing agency, and began to arrange the house in my own way, carefully, without disturbing the grandfatherly atmosphere. Sometimes on weekends I would sit on the veranda with a book, watching the people passing by. My life was measured, and although there was no particular joy in it, there was no pain in it either. I haven't seen my mom in 3 years. At first it was a conscious decision, then it became a habit. It was as if we existed in parallel worlds, not even intersecting in our thoughts. But that December evening, when snowflakes were lazily swirling outside the window, and Christmas music was playing softly in the house, I suddenly felt a nagging feeling of missing something. I looked at the fire in the fireplace and remembered how in childhood we decorated the Christmas tree, how she laughed, putting a star on top, how tangerines and cinnamon smelled. Nostalgia, warm and deceptive, enveloped me, and without realizing it, I wrote her a short message: "Merry Christmas, Mom. I hope you're doing well." The answer came almost immediately, as if she had been waiting. "Emma. How nice to hear from you. Thank you. Why don't you come over for Christmas dinner? It will be nice to see you." I hesitated. But something in her tone struck me as sincere, maybe even remorseful. And I agreed. When I entered the house, it seemed to me that the atmosphere had changed. The kitchen smelled of pastries, music was playing, candles cast a soft light on the tablecloth. Mom was wearing a red dress, with her hair spilling over her shoulders, and she was smiling a little confusedly, but sincerely. Caitlin and Olivia were there too, polite, almost friendly. We had dinner, talked, and recalled funny incidents from the past. She even took out an old photo from one of our vacations, where the 3 of us, Mom, Dad, and I, were on a beach in California. I laughed as I listened to her tell me how I ate too much ice cream and then cried for 2 hours from the pain in my stomach. It was almost real. Almost. That evening, returning home, I thought that maybe everything was not lost. That maybe we've both changed, matured, and learned to forgive. I allowed myself to hope that the past could be softened, if not forgotten. A couple of weeks later, the call came. It was Mom. "Emma, I don't know if you're comfortable," she said uncertainly. "I have a problem with the equipment in the bakery. Everything is up, and I do not know where to find the money. How much do you need?" I asked, almost without thinking. 10,000. I understand that it's a lot, and I'll give it back, honestly. It's just urgent right now. Good. I'll translate it, I replied. I hope everything gets better. You're a savior, Em. Thank you. I knew I could count on you. I hung up the phone with a feeling of satisfaction. Maybe being needed is the way to get back. Maybe I'm finally a daughter again. But it didn't stop at one request. A call soon followed for help with Caitlin's tuition fees. Then there were the taxes, which unexpectedly increased. Then, urgent repairs. The amounts were less than the first one, but still significant. I gave without demanding anything in return. I convinced myself that this was a gesture of goodwill, a step towards reconciliation. After all, family is support, isn't it? And then there was the birthday. I've been getting ready. She bought the same coffee machine, remembering how she loved coffee. I came with hope, with a little excitement. But everything went wrong. She unpacked the gift, glanced at the device, and her lips curled into a contemptuous smile. Coffee maker? I hinted at the necklace. You remember. Caitlin burst out laughing, and Olivia rolled her eyes. Mom nodded silently. No one said thank you. No one hugged me. I stood there like a stranger, feeling completely confused. Then everything went according to the usual scenario. I was sitting in the corner, eating a cake, not feeling the taste, and they were having fun, as if I wasn't there. I left without saying goodbye. I got home late, with a headache, a heaviness in my chest, and a clear feeling that I had returned not to the past, but to a trap. Around 2 a.m, unable to sleep, I opened my phone. The notification is a new social media post. On the screen is a photo of a coffee machine, on a white background. Signature, a useless gift from the most useless daughter in the world. I've read it 3 times. Then I opened the comments. There were dozens of likes, well-meaning advice in quotation marks, ridicule, sympathetic sighs addressed to her. People I'd never met judged me, called me greedy, ungrateful, and blind. I didn't cry. I didn't burn bridges in a rage. I just realized that I'm not going to let them wipe their feet on me anymore. There was silence. But this time, she wasn't an emptiness, she was a solution. I knew what to do next. And this time, for myself. The next morning, I woke up early, as soon as the dawn began to turn gray outside the windows. There was a deep silence in the house, broken only by the creaking of floorboards as I walked down the hallway barefoot, on tiptoe, as if afraid to frighten my own thoughts. I brewed strong coffee, the same one from my grandfather's old coffee grinder, and stood at the window for a long time, holding a warm cup in my palms, watching the frost silver on the roof of the neighboring house. The world was as still as a frozen lake, and in that silence, a memory suddenly surfaced, grandfather's voice, calm, confident, a little husky. I only lent her the money against a receipt. If you ever need them, you can return them. I didn't think much of those words at the time. Back then, I still believed in goodness. I put down my cup, wiped my palms, and went into his office. The room, which I had long cherished as a temple, held the smell of old wood, dust, and something almost imperceptible, time, probably. Everything on the table remained as he had left it, neatly lined papers, a paperweight in the shape of a bronze eagle, a cup with dried paint on the bottom, and a box with his cufflinks. I opened the bottom drawer. The papers were sorted into folders: medical documents, tax reports, letters from clients. I slowly sorted through them, and finally found her. It was white, thick paper, with my grandfather's clear, angular handwriting and my mother's signature at the bottom. Receipt. $150,000, given for the opening of a bakery, with the right to demand at any time at the request of the creditor or his legitimate heir. There was no question of debt forgiveness. It was all official. Legally. Legally. I sat on his leather chair, holding the sheet in my hands, and stared out the window for a long time. I thought maybe I should leave everything, let her forget, let her live as she wants. But that would be another betrayal, a betrayal of oneself. For the first time in a long time, I had the opportunity to restore justice. Not for revenge. For my own sake. I dialed the number of Mr. Lowry, my grandfather's lawyer, a man he trusted more than many relatives. "Emma," I heard his warm, slightly tired voice. "How many years, how many winters? How are you, honey?" "It's all right, Mr. Lowry. But I need your advice." I found a receipt signed by my mother. About that loan from my grandfather. I want to request a refund. He paused, and then said softly, "Yes, I remember that agreement. It really is. From a legal point of view, it's clean. You're his heir, and you have every right to be. Can you help me make a notification?" "Of course," he replied. "Send me a copy, and I will prepare the documents." After the call, I sat for a long time, not moving. I had a strange feeling, not triumph, not anger, but clarity. Transparent, precise, like spring ice. I was no longer that naive girl who believed in love through gifts. I became a woman who had boundaries. In the evening, when I returned from the office, I took out a thick gift box, the one in which I put the brooch for my grandfather last year. I put a neatly folded copy of the receipt in it, and added a short handwritten note. "According to the receipt signed by you on May 12, 2017, you are obligated to refund the amount of $150,000 within 30 calendar days from the date of receipt of this notification. With respect, Emma." Nothing superfluous. Not a single word of pain. Before closing the lid, I froze. Something inside me told me that everything would change from now on. I knew it wasn't just paper. It's a mirror. A mirror in which she will have to see herself, not as a mother, not as a bakery owner, not as a victim, but as a woman who took and did not give. I wrote a short message. Mom, I'm sorry about yesterday. I sent you another gift. I hope you like it better than the coffee machine. The answer came almost instantly, as if she were sitting with a phone in her hand. I hope this is the necklace I was hinting at. I smiled. How much a person can say between the lines, and how little they understand. I called the courier this morning. The package is gone. I was sitting in the kitchen, drinking coffee and watching a small green circle on the Aurora map move on the tracking screen. An hour later, it stopped, delivered. I sighed and prepared to wait. The phone rang 27 minutes later. I didn't answer. He called again. And again. There were 5 rooms. Then 9. On the 14th, I dropped the call. On the 18th, she turned off the sound. I put the phone on the table and went out onto the veranda, covering myself with a blanket. The sky was overcast, and the air smelled of snow. I hugged my knees and just listened to the wind. On the 23rd ring, I answered. You've ruined everything. Her voice trembled. Emma, how can you? We are a family. No, Mom. I just won't let you destroy me anymore. You can't do this to me. This is between me and your grandfather. He left me everything, including obligations. And the rights. That's not human, Emma. We have problems, you know. Bakery. Girls' studies. Home. Not my problem, I said softly. You chose. You always chose. Silence hung in the receiver, as if both words and air had ended. Then she said in a different, almost broken voice. So you want to ruin everything? No, I replied calmly. I want to build it. Myself. Without you. I hung up and turned off the phone. And for the first time in a long time, I felt relief, not anxiety, not guilt. Everything fell into place. And if this was a retaliatory move, it was not vindictive, but just. It was my step towards freedom. The days, weeks after sending that box stretched out like a cold morning in January, slowly, viscous, inexorably. I knew that silence would be followed by a storm, and I was not mistaken. The very next day, someone was knocking on my door. I looked through the curtain, and there she was. She stood on my porch in her cashmere coat, clutching her purse to her chest as if it could protect her. At first, I just rang the bell. Then she pounded with her fists. Then she sat down on the steps and sat there for almost an hour, hunched over, with her fingers clasped. I stood on the other side of the door, pressing my palms against the jamb, but I didn't open it. Not out of anger. Out of necessity. The calls fell on the phone like leaves from a tree in October, one after the other, from different numbers, from different voices. Sometimes I listened, briefly, jerkily, just to know how far they were willing to go. Sometimes she ignored messages in order not to give them food for new accusations. Lucas came to my office one day, walking up to the reception desk with a confident smile, as if nothing had happened. "Excuse me, I need to talk to Emma." "It's an urgent family matter," he told the girl at the counter, glancing pointedly at her name tag. I saw him through the glass partition and felt my whole body tense up. I went out to him, keeping my back straight. "Go away, Lucas. Or should I call security?" He froze for a moment, his eyes flashing with anger. "You're the one who brought her to tears. She doesn't sleep at night. The bakery is on the verge." "It's time to wake up," I replied, and turned around without waiting for an answer. After that, messages from Caitlin and Olivia began. They wrote from unfamiliar numbers, caustically, with contempt, as if their world was collapsing, and I was the only one to blame. I've read phrases like cruel egoist, you ruin your family, you've always been trash. Some of the messages were written at 3 o'clock in the morning. Some were accompanied by photos with empty bakery windows, with sales, with the words, "Are you happy now?" I saved each one. Not out of vindictiveness. Out of prudence. One day, Susan, an old friend of my mother's, intercepted me. She literally appeared next to my car at the grocery store. The wind blew her thin scarf, and there was real despair in her eyes. "Emma," she said, "for God's sake, talk to your mother. She's on edge. The bakery may close. The house is secured. What are you doing?" "I'm taking what belongs to me," I said calmly, loading the bags into the trunk. "But you know she can't handle it. It's cruel." "And where were you, Susan, when she called me useless, when you were all laughing at my gift? Where were you when she kicked not only me out of her life, but also the memory of my father?" Susan pressed her lips together and looked away. "You just don't know the whole picture," she muttered. "Oh, I know enough." She left, shaking her head. I got in the car, exhaled, put my hands on the steering wheel, and felt calm for the first time in a long time. I wasn't taking revenge. I was defending myself. 3 weeks after the box was shipped, Mr. Lowry called me. "Emma, your mother contacted me. She found an opportunity to repay the debt. We're meeting tomorrow to finalize the deal. Do you want to be present?" I didn't hesitate for long. "Yes. I want to be there." The next morning, I chose a dark blue dress and a coat that my grandfather bought me for my first job. I put my hair neatly, without frills. Makeup is discreet. Everything I loved. I had to feel confident, firm, and not hesitate. It wasn't a revenge date. It was a meeting with the past, which had to be put to rest. Mr. Lowry's office was located in a brick building with arched windows and the smell of fresh wood. When I entered, she was already sitting in the meeting room, hunched over, extinguished. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, her face was pale, and her eyes were dim. She looked 10 years older. We made eye contact, and there was no pride or guilt in her gaze. Just fatigue. I sat down across from him. Mr. Lowry took out the documents, spoke the standard legal formulas, and handed her a pen. She signed it without asking any questions. Then she took a cash receipt out of her bag and put it on the table. "Are you happy now?" Her voice sounded hoarse. I took the check, slowly, carefully, like something fragile. I looked at her. "I just wanted you to see me as a daughter again someday. Not a wallet. Not a source of awkwardness. Just a daughter." She looked down and ran her hand over her cheek. "I guess we were both not the best people," she whispered. I didn't say anything. No pretentious speeches, no scenes. Everything has already been said. I stood up, nodded to Mr. Lowry, thanked him for everything, and headed for the exit. The sun was bright that day, unseasonably warm. I stood by my car, holding the receipt in my hands, and I felt neither joy, nor relief, nor even victory. It's just fatigue. Deep, dense, like a blanket that covered my head. It wasn't closure, it wasn't retribution, it wasn't satisfaction. It was a breakup. With everything, with illusions, with expectations, with childish hopes. And although there was silence inside, it finally became calm in this silence. Life doesn't change abruptly, like in the movies. There's no rumble, no slow-falling drama. She leaves softly, almost noiselessly, like snow covering footprints. It was the same with me. After the meeting at Mr. Lowry's office, everything outwardly remained the same. I went to work, bought bread at the bakery on the corner, and said good morning to my neighbor over the fence. But something irreversible was happening inside. A thin, invisible spring that had been compressed for years was slowly unclenching. The space inside me has become wider. There was a place for himself in it. Mom disappeared from social media after a couple of days. Not a single photo, not a single signature. The profiles, once filled with glowing snapshots, motivational quotes, and boasts about women's business, now look like abandoned storefronts. Someone may have noticed, someone may even have regretted it. I'm not. Lisa, a colleague from the agency, told me that the bakery sells equipment. I saw the ad, she said, coming into my office with a cup of tea. Sweet Dreams sells out everything. Right down to the coffee machine. I grinned, not maliciously, but with a touch of irony. Everything goes back to the beginning. Or maybe to the truth. Even in the names. Well, it's probably just dreams now, I replied, and went back to the report. A few days later, Lisa came up to me again. You won't believe this. I was at Burton's, choosing a coat, and who do I see? Caitlin. She put sweaters on a shelf. Seriously. Uniform, badge. I thought maybe it was a doppelganger. But it wasn't a mistake. Everything fell into place. The money invested in the illusion of a new family has dried up. The soap bubble has burst. Life has become real, without decorations, without preferences. And then I saw them myself. I was walking through the store, looking at the cereal, and suddenly I heard someone awkwardly cough. Melissa turned around. Or rather, Olivia. Her hair is tied up in a bun, her face is tired, she has the shape of a supermarket, a cardboard box in her hands. Our eyes met. She froze for a second, then quickly lowered her gaze. I continued walking as if nothing had happened. But she caught up with me at the exit. Are you happy now? What is it? She asked. Her voice was strained, like a rubber band on the verge of breaking. I stopped, looked at her, and said softly, Yes. I'm really happy. She rocked back, as if she hadn't expected such a simple answer. Did she want to be rebuked? Or vice versa, regret? I don't know. But I knew one thing, I was telling the truth. It's been a few weeks. Spring was coming into its own, and the city was blooming. It became unbearable for me to stay in one place. I felt my body begging for movement, breathing, and the horizon. I've booked a small cottage in South Carolina, right by the ocean, where the air smells of salt in the evenings and warmth and tree bark in the daytime. I packed my suitcase, turned off all notifications on my phone, and drove off, as if I were leaving behind not only the city, but also an entire chapter of my life. The cottage turned out to be exactly what I needed. A simple white veranda, wide windows, wooden floors, and the endless whisper of waves behind a thin wall. I woke up early, went barefoot to the shore, feeling the sand cool my heels. I read books a lot, one after the other, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. She was writing something in a notebook, with no purpose, just throwing out her thoughts. She brewed herself coffee, slowly, thoughtfully, watching the steam rise up, disappear like everything disappearing. For the first time in many years, I didn't expect any calls, messages, invitations, or approval. I was just there. On the third evening, I was sitting on a wooden bench, watching the surf, and realized, I don't miss you. I'm not bored. I don't expect reconciliation. I didn't feel angry. Not to my mother, not to my sisters, not to myself. There was just this strange, piercing feeling of freedom. It was as if I had lifted from my shoulders an invisible weight that I had lived with for so long that I couldn't even remember what it was like without it. When I got home, I found an envelope in the mailbox. Without a return address, on thick paper, the handwriting is familiar and clear. It was a letter from my mother. You chose money, she wrote, just as I once chose another family. We both gave up on something important. Maybe we just deserve each other. Don't write anymore. We can do it without your charity and without your cruelty. I reread the letter, then read it again. Not a single line stung. I didn't feel any resentment or pain. I just carefully tore the paper into even strips, folded it and threw it away. Without drama, without words, without regret. I was no longer the girl who brought gifts hoping for praise. She wasn't a woman turned into an ATM. I no longer played the game where love must be earned and resentment must be hidden within myself. I was just me. The real one. Calm. Quiet. Strong. I no longer proved to anyone that I was worthy. I knew it myself. And that was enough. For the first time in many years, I was going my own way.